So, welcome, folks. There's nothing better to do. You guys might hear me say that a lot in my interviews and in my videos. And what it comes from a podcast that I did over 10 years ago. And I just wanted to say that because there's something about being too early, and I definitely was too early in the podcast game. Back in 2007, 2008, we had this podcast that we called Folks with Nothing Better to Do Radio. And it was a very, very popular podcast. And I know some people have actually been following me since the beginning, since the MySpace days. They might remember that podcast. I know, for one, my guy Kid Fury, shout out to him, used to call up into that podcast years ago. It was called Blog Talk Radio, but essentially all it was a podcast. And there's this thing about being too early. And it's okay if you're too early at something. And I think a lot of times when people try to do stuff, they're ahead of the curve. And they do stuff and it doesn't work. And one of the reasons why it doesn't work is because you're too early. So stick with it, and eventually sometimes that stuff does pay off. Me, unfortunately, we did this podcast weekly for maybe a year or two. And then people got jobs and everything else because it wasn't just my podcast and they sort of fell off. But it was a fun time and a fun experience, and no one knew what podcasting was, but it was a very, very interesting time in my life and life in general. And I remember when I got hired at Global Grind, and they told me to own this story. I want you to own this story. And I was like, own the story? I don't know what the fuck that means. What does it mean, own the story? Just, I want you to be responsible for the story. I want everything about the story to come from you. And I was like, wow, own the story. And I don't know if I did. I just covered everything. I just regurgitated the shit that I saw. This was a while back and before everyone had Instagram. But I owned the story. And thinking about that brought me back to one of my favorite movie quotes, which is from Fight Club, where Ed Norton's character says, the things you own end up owning you. And at first when I heard it, it didn't really mean anything to me. I was like, oh, that's deep. Like, yeah, like I'm conscious about my Jordans and I don't want anyone to step on my Jordans, and, you know, my couch and my paintings need to be perfectly aligned. But then I started thinking about it. The stuff that you own end up owning you. And for the past 15 years of my life, I've owned writing online. I've owned online content. I've owned that. And those things end up owning me. And I put so much energy into that. Waking up at 5 o'clock every morning to write a blog for blogzilla.com about relationships and sex. And then when I got off of work, because I had a job back then, I would read every article about relationships and sex and then take that and make it into my own. And I literally owned it. And in turn of me owning that process of relationships and movies, that process ended up owning me. It was the best part of my life. It was everything that I yearned for. And it's that type of passion that you guys need to have in order to create your goals. Look, I'm only here because I wrote a blog called 5 Reasons Why I Would Do What's on Kaya's shirt. Kaya had a shirt that said, fuck Kaya. And I was like, yeah, I'll fuck Kaya. Like, I would write the craziest things. And even now in my interviews, I always try to think outside the box. And it's that outside thinking that really owns me today. And that's just a small part of my process about the things you own end up owning you. And I say all that to say that if you own your craft and own the things that you need to do to achieve the goals you want to achieve, you will be in a remarkable place in life, because that thing that you want will end up owning you, and it will pull you in directions that you never thought you would be in. And that's just a small part of the process that you need to take to get to the next level. Peace.